Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land and respect the ongoing living culture of Aboriginal people. Thanks for having us. My name's Michelle. And, you know, I'm going to have a little rant before we start, and Jason doesn't even know about this, so sorry, Jace. You know, we heard Captain Brendan, and we go to 614, and we live next door to Brendan and Sandra. Never see them. I don't think they're even home. Commend them for their hard work. They're amazing people with a real passion. But does anyone know who Clinton Pryor is? An Indigenous man who walked from Perth to Canberra. It took him a year. So down in Melbourne, he came to visit us. We do a lot of work where I work with the local Indigenous community, and we're having a reconciliation party, and he dropped in. And, you know, his walk from Perth to Canberra, he got there in September.
It kind of makes Brendan sound uncommitted, really, doesn't it?
Really, this is nothing
Melbourne
about
to Canberra.
This is no negative, but I just, as I've acknowledged the traditional owners of this land, we don't listen to them. No one knows who Clinton is. He was walking to protest the forced closure of Aboriginal communities. And when he got to Canberra, the Prime Minister would meet him, but he had to go through the back door. He had to meet him in the back courtyard. And it's shame on us. So we need to listen to the owners of this land. We need to have a conversation, and if we're going to work with them, we need to understand what they need from us. Yeah, we don't do enough of that.
I want to connect this up a little bit with yesterday too. We're going to, I should say, and you'll have figured this out already, but we want to kind of run this session fairly conversationally. I guess we don't do this together very often. We've had separate appointments as officers for a little while, working in different spheres, which we'll talk about. But even the fact that I'm here mostly in uniform today and Michelle's not, we approach things differently. We think that might be a good thing for you, that you don't get all of the one view, and that hopefully a little bit with yesterday as well. I thought the stuff on around asylum seekers and refugees was really kind of thought-provoking. And one of the thoughts that it provoked for me actually was that we're here as the descendants of economic refugees. I've been doing a bit of family history lately, and in fact we visited kind of the UK recently, and a lot of my family are from Wales, and they're stocky white people, all the Welsh, and that's where I get it from. But my grandfather came out in the 1920s as a teenager with his family seeking a better life in Australia. I'm here because my family came seeking a better life. Michelle's family roots are from Ireland and England as well. We're all kind of from UK kind of roots. Generations of Australians came out here seeking a better life, and many of us are here because of that, regardless of where that was. It seems somehow we're stuck between this history of frankly, the brutality of colonisation on the one hand, and a very kind of harsh attitude to people who are not simply seeking a better life for economic reasons, but seeking to avoid terrible persecution, and their lives are literally endangered. And we stand in the middle of those two things. And I think to some extent they're connected. The founder of the Salvation Army, William Booth, well over 100 years ago and coming to Australia, said something like, as soon as someone lands in this land, they stick a placard in the ground that says Australia for the Australians. As if, suddenly there's a line in the ground and we're different to everybody else. Other people are kind of foreigners here. And I think that, I think that's both true but also incredibly disrespectful. It's disrespectful to the first Australians who were here 60,000 years before most of the rest of us, but also to try and pretend that there is some great difference between us and those who are arriving now seeking a better life.
You stole my thunder this morning, Campbell, when he said, we don't come here to tell you how to suck eggs. We come here humbly to say thank you for having us and really respect the work that you do in the context that you do that you know about, that we don't. We come from Melbourne. It's Richmond. We come from Richmond, particularly. We don't barrack for Richmond, but that's where we live. Building repairs on our house start next week because it's been havoc.
The entire suburb was trash.
By the West Coast people that came over, no. But
give you that one because you need it.
We love your work. That's what I want to say. And this whole community is inspiring and quite amazing. I want to highlight Dave and Kylie to you. What amazing leaders you've got here. And I don't just say that because, Kylie and I kind of grew up together and things like that, but that, they put on this so that you can have some vision and, give you some context. And I think that's awesome. We think you're awesome, amazing people. So, and it's hard being in those positions. No one puts their hand up for that. So well done. Good job.
We're going to tell you a little bit more about where we're from.
Stop trying to hurry me on. See,
okay.
This is the difference between us. I don't want to have this long conversation. I want to know where you're from, what you do. So I'm going to tell you about Jason. Yes, I have.
This is why I should hurry you on, I think.
Oh, my goodness. We've been married since time began, it feels like. But it's been nice, mostly. And he's the opposite to me. I am the Hamish, he is the Andy. And he started off with 1 degree when we met, I think. He didn't have a degree. And then he went, I think I might do my master's. So he got a master's. And he went, I think I might do another one. So he got another one. I didn't finish high school, by the way. And then he said, I think I'll just get a PhD. So he went and did that. And he's just recently I'm very proud of him. And he uses his forces for good. Neither of us have army background. We're first generation in our family army. But I was telling Campbell before, I came through the pub ministries. So Friday night on a pub, parents sent their kids to the army. Jason came through JAM.
I did.
High school.
Is that it?
Yeah, for the moment.
Okay. I do like a plan, and I can never rely on Michelle to stick to the plan, so she's just going to say whatever she wants throughout the day. I'm tempted to introduce Michelle, but I'll just say that she's a past Timbrel leader at the Northcote Corps. And I'm not going to explain that. They're better off.
I'll give you this demo later, if we can rustle up a demo.
No, you'll find out more about us. I want to say a little bit, some of you heard, or probably most of you heard, me talk a little bit about the work that I do with the Victorian Social Policy Unit, but I want to say a little bit more about that now, simply because I can get rid of these things that I've got sitting on my lap. So part of what we do, we put out a couple of kind of major publications every year. One of them's coming up in Anti-Poverty Week, where we release kind of our snapshot part of the ESIS report. Every year around the Red Shield Appeal, the Salvation Army does this economic social impact survey, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that. But we've been, for the past few years, pulling out of the national data, the data specifically for Victoria, and recasting that to kind of tell the story about our state. And say, look, this is what's happening kind of in Victoria, and we release that in Anti-Poverty Week. There's a couple of advantages of that for us, and that is that it allows us to kind of take data that's already there and retell the story. It's one of the easiest reports we ever do, and you're guaranteed to get a little bit of media during Anti-Poverty Week because they're looking for what those kind of stories are. The second one is that it also gives us kind of another entry point to have a conversation with the government. Say, oh well, you want to know what's happening kind of with some vulnerable people in Victoria. This is how some of your most vulnerable and disadvantaged citizens are suffering, and that's what it looks like. So that's kind of the easy one. The other one we're just kind of in the midst of putting together now, which takes a bit longer, which is a state budget submission, which sounds like it's a boring economic document, and some of you may think it is. You're not meant to nod at that point. But look, it's got colourful pictures and stuff. But what this really is a chance to kind of tell some key stories, in fact. There are some numbers in it, and we've got an economist that works with us who's actually a volunteer, who kind of ensures that what we put out has, a bit of credibility and so on. But the process for this is that we travel around the state, firstly, and we're actually in the middle of doing that now. We travel around the state visiting frontline services, like the services you've got here, and we say to them, what are you seeing? What are the patterns that are happening? Because we think, I mentioned this yesterday, that if someone comes knocking on the door of the Salvation Army, something's gone wrong. It's cause for concern, and we want to find out where those gaps are and make some proposals about how to plug them so it doesn't happen again and again and again. So
you're highlighting the importance of good data collection?
It's absolutely
because
vital.
That's not my department, but do it, someone.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to come back to data collection, absolutely. But, this does rely on that. So we gather up those stories. We try and pick out what the major themes are. We put them together with case studies. So there's bits in there for people who don't want to see the numbers that are actually just stories of, people and what's happening with them. And thanks. And so that's part of what we do. The other thing that I just was going to mention, because this just arrived on my desk before I left this week, is anyone familiar with Parity magazine? A couple of people? Yeah. This one's just come out, which is ironically August. I know that sounds like a long time ago, but there's always a kind of lag in their publications. But it's on the future of national homelessness policy. And so if you're interested in kind of the policy end of that, dig up a Parity magazine from somewhere. There's some great stuff in there. We actually sponsor one of these every year. And that does a couple of things. Not only does it kind of embed great gratitude with the peak body, the Council to Homeless Persons, because we send them a little bit of funds, but it actually allows me to kind of write an opinion piece. Kind of at the end of that, we get programs to write into it as well. So the last time we did one around people exiting prison, falling into homelessness, and what some of the problems were and some of the solutions attached to that. And so I wrote something. We had a couple of programs, something that Salvation Army in Tassie jumped in and wrote some stuff as well. So it became a great way of kind of getting out, some really good discussion around some of those problems. Back to the plan.
Okay. I think we've got a picture of our family even here.
I'm sure we do.
We've got 3 children. That's us at Christmas. Madeline is standing with me. She's 25. She's a midwife in Darwin. We're so proud of her. What a wonderful human she is. Courtney, she's just about to graduate as a high school teacher. So she's looking for a job. And our favourite child is Fitz. Fitz, middle name Roy. He is the apple of our eye, really, isn't he? We've got 3 cats and a turtle, but for some reason they wouldn't get in the photo with us. So that's us in a nutshell.
So I've talked a bit about what I do. Michelle's going to tell you a little bit about her work as a chaplain at Crisis Services and what that looks like, to give you a bit of the context from which we're speaking today.
Okay, this is the Crisis Centre. So number 29 is the Crisis Centre, which also houses a needle syringe exchange program in the front. Next door is what we call Access House. Downstairs is a GP clinic, referrals to physio, podiatry, psych, everything dental. We work in partnership with RDNF and the Royal District Nursing people, those people the nursing people. And upstairs is family violence. So we do one of the regions in Victoria, family violence, a really huge kind of growing program. Luna Park is like a 10-minute walk. Yeah, so we're sort of, off Fitzroy Street, which is was the main strip. It's kind of dying at the moment. But anyway, now off-site we have...
Can I just say... It's
not part of the plan.
Yeah. So Grey Street in St Kilda, where this is based, is kind of the historic location Melbourne, really, for street sex work and particularly for intravenous drug users. The Salvation Army saw that 30 years ago and said, oh, this is where we need to be. And so not only, we've kind of, the couple of buildings there, we actually were in the one on the left first, the previous ones, and moved into the one on the right, took the next one kind of in the street for a little while there too, because it was such a good base to work from. But the work from there has grown from something which, had an officer appointed to it and housed a few homeless young people for a while in a few rooms without any great plan, to something that now works with about 10,000 individuals a year, about 20,000 contacts. The needle and syringe exchange that runs out of there, I don't know what we don't want to compete in this space, but it was at one point the biggest kind of in the Southern Hemisphere. They give out about 1 million needles and syringes a year, about 50,000 contacts.
Yeah, and it's 24/7 every day of the year. So the Crisis Centre also do after-hours response right across Victoria for homelessness. So once it hits 5, all the contacts come into the Crisis Centre at St Kilda. The next photo was our youth and family service. I was telling some of the girls earlier, this is a purpose-built building, and it's on this slither of land, so it's a long, long building, and it has interconnecting rooms so that we can change the sort of makeup of, we've got a family, we need a bit of extra room, let's unlock that door and we have access to something extra. It's independent living, but there's the office up this end and case negotiators, is that what they were? It's kind of, we call them caseworkers. Navigators, sorry. Negotiators. That's what it's like sometimes. They are there and people are assigned a worker and a really holistic look at someone's life, encouraged to stay in education. They have quite a high population of LGBTQI young people, and they have quite a few transgendered people there who young people who I think they've kept alive during the younger parts of their lives, and and then they have properties outside of that where people go to when they live, and they support them, so they continue to support them. That's an awesome, awesome place. They have a gardening program, and I think the next photo is of Dominic with his big barrow of gardening stuff. That's one of the workers there. So, yeah.
The setting there is really significant. You saw some of the photos that Ian showed earlier of those kind of mass dormitory styles kind of in the US, which still abound, and the Salvation Army runs those. We run big centres that hold 400, 500 people kind of at times. And specialist ones just for people who've been veterans. It's going to be very difficult to actually ever move away from that kind of scale in a place like the US, where a city like LA or New York has 100,000 homeless people. That's how many we've got in our whole country here. And that's way too many to have in Australia. But how you do anything that doesn't move beyond that kind of massive scale in a place like the US is an incredible challenge. So as awful as that looks like, it's going to take a really kind of massive intentional shift for them to move beyond that. So our challenges are plenty, and we're going to talk about some of those. But it is much worse in a lot of other places too. Have I? Okay, cool. Let's talk about this then. Help me out here. What's next on the agenda? Is this a bit of a picture of homelessness? Okay. So we saw some of this. Oh, look, I won't dwell too much on this kind of stuff, the stats kind of stuff, because it's dead boring, but kind of important as well in the snapshot of kind of who we're talking about. And when you look at the things here, for instance, even the stuff around boarding houses, look at the gender kind of switch there. Most of the people who stay in boarding houses overwhelmingly are men, 3/4 in this particular case. Men also kind of dominate on the streets. Why is that? Because there are more homeless men than women? No, it's not. The stats don't show that. It's because women are actually put in situations where they're forced to make compromises because their safety is so bad if they're on the streets or in the rooming houses. So they end up going back to violent partners to stay housed. Or actually in many cases, I think we undercount women as well. When we do street counts even, we count people who are sleeping kind of, visibly on the pavement. We don't count the woman in the backseat of her car, maybe with a child or something. So I think you look at kind of those stats and we think of kind of our preconceptions of what homelessness is like, particularly rough sleeping, which itself is only a relatively small proportion of all homelessness. But we do tend to kind of overcount men in that. These are national stats. So they do go back. We haven't really kind of got a really good view of the latest stats from the last census yet. We're still waiting to do that. So these are still from kind of 2011. I think overall the kind of breakdowns that we've got here are still fairly accurate. I suspect the numbers are higher 5 years later on. Yeah. Maybe some higher numbers in family violence simply because of the publicity that's had. Certainly that will be the case in Victoria with our Royal Commission. Nothing again amazing there except for the bottom half of that. Just a reminder of the number of young people, the proportion that kind of make up this population is massive. It really kind of highlights the significance of kind of early intervention for homelessness, because as you go to people who've been homeless for longer periods, that kind of classic picture of the older homeless person who's maybe been on the streets for decades, invariably their first experience of homelessness was when they were a teenager. So if we're not doing something kind of effective at those early stages, the likelihood of long-term periods of homelessness is dramatically increased. Yep. Let's go to the next one. So where are they? Again, South Australia is on the right end of that spectrum, which is good, but it's pretty bad right across the country. There's no winning state really for homelessness. The Northern Territory is the big loser usually. You can see that kind of on the right-hand side there, that massive kind of column. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's not to say, and we've come across it more times than I would like, that you don't occasionally find 11-year-olds and 10-year-olds in squats and other places that no one of that age should ever be. It absolutely happens, but the vast majority of them in that count are part of families. Yep. All right, and just a couple more. Where do they stay? So this has got some stuff around boarding houses and temporary things. The definition of homelessness in Australia does allow for everything from sleeping rough, couch surfing, etc., in terms of primary homelessness, through to a range of things where you have insecure tenure. So you might seem like you've got a place in a boarding house. Oh, great! You're not really homeless, but actually you could be homeless tomorrow. There's nothing to say that your status in that particular place allows you to be there for the kind of period that you would hope to be, even in private rental. And why are they homeless? Mostly want to highlight here that top one there around domestic and family violence, because that's been a really big one for us recently. It is the largest single contributor to homelessness, and not only are people who are coming out of family violence situations very commonly kind of finding themselves in homelessness, but actually if you do the reverse as well and you look at a homeless population and ask them about whether they had family violence in their life at some point, whether it was immediately precipitating the homelessness or not, maybe sometime further back. In fact, almost all of them have experienced that at some point. So a really, really significant factor. We can't deal with homelessness unless we're dealing with family violence in some way. Yep. All right. And, okay, so what we wanted to do here is really... I headed this best practices, and then I didn't want to come and say, oh, we know a bunch of magical things that you've never thought of because, we're so smart from Melbourne. But what I wanted to do was actually prompt a bunch of questions. And I've got a few thoughts about these questions, which I want to share with you. But you'll have some as well. And I think probably what's more important in this space are the questions than the answers, but allow those to kind of dwell with you for a bit. I think they're valuable. I always like a good question better than a good answer, which is probably my theological bent as well. So the first one is around client-centred practice. How can we increase people's voices in the services that they need? This is one of the questions we're really struggling with at the moment, actually, and I'd be the last to tell you we've got really good answers on this. We're committed to the notion that the key decisions kind of around how services look and what they do and what they deliver and how they deliver them, shouldn't be designed by, people like you and I sitting in an office who know something about the problem but who maybe don't know as much as someone who's experienced it firsthand. So the voice of service users, is really something that we can do a lot better with. Michelle,
I can tell you how we do it at
tell me a little bit about
Crisis Services. So Crisis Services have a commitment to listening to clients. They are informed about past and present situations of clients. I call them clients, people. And we're committed to actually listening and doing something about that. So we have what's called CMAG, which I just never remember what that means, but I know what it means, but I don't remember the words. It's Community Member Action Group. So we have a bunch of past and current clients who are facilitated by 2 staff, and they are paid to be there. And they have had training with a PESP group, like participation sort of client participation group that has trained them to take part in, this kind of thing. And we pay them for their time. We don't pay them for good opinion, like best opinions about us. And we involve them in things like the rainbow tick. We've had a rainbow tick participation, client participation feedback. So rainbow tick, Jason will explain. He's really good at explaining what that is because I always forget. I just assume everyone knows, but I'm sorry. So we've had them in to give us their opinions and their experiences. We want to hear about their experiences about our service in this, in this space. So Crisis Services operate very heavily that way. We need to hear about how we're going with services, and same with our local work with Indigenous people.
You want to hear where things go wrong, actually, which is not our natural instinct.
Yep.
But actually, we want to hear a bit from those people that we let down. How do we do better? How do we stuff that up? And let's not be protective about that necessarily with a view to hiding it or brushing it away or whatever. We've had for a long time quite often, complaints mechanisms and stuff like that. Someone, if they're, literate enough and determined enough to bother filling out a form and going through a bureaucratic process, the kind of processes that usually aren't, our clients aren't naturally inclined because they haven't won in many of them ever. But that kind of notion of kind of client voice is, really, really critical and allowing us to get better because we recognise where we got it wrong.
Yep.
Anyway, let's have a look at the next one. Holistic framework, individualistic delivery. I've put 2 things together here, but I do think there's a relationship between them. This won't be news to you. We've been banging on for a long time around the need to kind of take a holistic perspective. And I think one of the reasons we struggle with, we're still talking about that, is that our funding bodies actually are really terrible at it. You get funded to deliver a single aspect of a program. So to deal with someone's drug and alcohol issue or their mental health problem or their gambling problem or their housing or whatever. But actually, a lot of people come with 5 or 6 of those altogether. And then it's up to the community sector to try and put together a package kind of responses that deals with that. That people absolutely deserve that package. They shouldn't have to go and hunt for it themselves and try and piece together something and to know everything about every area that might be kind of affecting them.
And some people don't even know that one affects
absolutely.
the other.
Yeah. Or aren't even aware that something is kind of at play. That's problematic, but I think the onus is kind of on us to have to deal with that. But the other end of it is that actually, despite the fact that the person in front of you today is the third person you've seen with co-occurring mental health and drug and alcohol issues who was angry about something that happened on the weekend. Each one of them has an individual story to tell, and actually the response that they need isn't the response that the first person or the second person got. It's a response that's about them specifically. The conference that Carl and I were at together earlier in the year talked about the notion of personalised medicine. Instead of giving someone the same prescription who comes to you with a similar kind of thing, more and more we're recognising kind of the need in the medical field to tailor solutions in the way that we deal with something to people's individual characteristics, biological, psychosocial, etc. And I think the same kind of thing is of great interest to us in kind of the community sector, about how do we genuinely respond in ways that aren't just a one-size-fits-all kind of response.
I had a client who we run a monthly pet clinic. So I have a real heart for people and their animals, and it just brings so much fulfillment for people to have relationships with, other people that are not human. And so I jumped at the chance to be involved in our pet clinic, which runs monthly in our Access Health building, and a local vet comes in and brings his staff and donate all the medicine for pets. And people make appointments through the crisis centre through the month, and then they turn up at 4:00 on a Sunday. First Sunday of the month, we've just had one, and I met this woman, Samantha. I'd change her name, but then when I talk about her, I always go back to the name. So I'm just going to stay with the names. And she had a cat, and she loved this cat, but the cat was, a little unruly and had come through her window, and she'd adopted it, and it knew it could get a good feed there. And she managed to make it to the crisis centre with her cat, and so we had it de-sexed. So I organised, picked up the cat, took the cat. She doesn't drive. She lives in a rooming house, really horrible rooming house. And from there, I had coffee with Sam. So Sam says to me, I can't see, and she's really blind. I saw her walking down the street one day holding the wall because she couldn't make her navigate her way. And as I got to know her, she was becoming deaf as well. So I asked the team back at Access Health, do we know her? Oh, yeah, we do know her. Long-term drug user, all kinds of, horrible things happened to Sam. We've known her in the past, and if you can get her in again, they're saying, that'd be great. But she's blind, so she's not been able to make her way back. So increasingly her world has been shrinking, and she's in this little rooming house, which is really horrible, and a cat comes to see her, and then this cat becomes her world. So we managed to get Sam to the doctor to have an eye appointment, and she kept not turning up to these appointments. So I'd go and pick her up, not there. Don't know where Sam is. She's disappeared. Sometimes she just says, I don't want to talk to anyone. So okay. So then after a few attempts, I left it. But I'd gotten her a phone, and so I was ringing her. And she couldn't see the phone anyway. So I don't know what I was doing there. But she, in the end, thought, my eyes are getting much, much worse, And Michelle keeps knocking on my window, and I did say to her I'd go to the optometrist, so I'm going to get there myself. So she's crawled her way around, without an appointment, because it was not far around the corner from her place, and just rocked up and said, I need to get my eyes tested. I've been here before, Michelle. I was here with Michelle, and we need to get this done. So it's a Friday afternoon. Of course, it's always a Friday afternoon. I'm about to go home and cuddle my dog, and by that I don't mean Jason, my actual dog. She rings. I get a call from the optometrist. You need to come and get Sam. I'm really concerned about her eyesight. We need to get her. I've already booked her an appointment with a specialist. That usually takes a few weeks to get into, but he just happens to be in his office. He's a friend of mine. You need to go there now. Oh, okay. So we trot around to pick her up, get her to the optometrist, the specialist. he's, you know, have you been to a specialist? They don't make eye contact. He's very formal, and Sam is, you know, exactly what you'd imagine. And so he had an exam. We get in there. He comes out with the results and says, I've rung the hospital and you're to go there now. She's about to lose her eyesight. We're really very concerned about her eyes. So from there, she was admitted to hospital, and, you know, there was some, I would visit her. She was there for weeks. She'd take off as well. You know, she'd go, I've had enough of this for a while, so she'd take off. The hospital would be ringing me, we can't find her. She's due to have her medicine. Or she's got an IV thing into her heart. Where is she? We're really worried. But we managed to make it through those weeks, and in the meantime managed to clean her room out. And so hopefully she'd come back with eyesight, and with her permission, of course. She gives me a key. We organised to have her room cleaned so that she would have a bit of a fresh start when she got back, because she really had not been able to see anything, and her living conditions were really very terrible. So, and in the meantime, our vet has taken the cat into his cattery so that we can care for. So her main worry was her cat. This is my companion. Where is my cat? So from there, we managed to they addressed her hearing as well. It ended up she had, you know, a horrible disease that is quite curable with the right antibiotics. So she's managed to get that. She's, in the meantime, also got onto Hep C treatment. And so she's finishing that. And so she's out now and actually seeing again for the first time. She says she's cutting down her drinking, but, you know, it's a work. But that is the kind of holistic thing out of meeting a woman with a cat, you know, that how the Salvation Army at crisis were able to kind of intervene into her life. Now we still go out for coffee and, you know, do a bit of shopping with her, because she's always short of money, but, you know, we love her.
That ancient Confucian proverb, a journey of 1,000 steps starts with a single cat. Yep. Before you know it, cleaning the room, putting the cat up, you know, a whole range of things. But, I mean, that woman would be blind today had she not, you know, tried to help her cat out. But had we only fixed the cat, that would have been disastrous. So that's the holistic thing. All right, the third one, thank you for continuing to move me on, Nathan. Relentless focus on improvement. This is, I guess, the bit about data, and I think I'm going to use myself kind of as an example here. We did quite a few things with social programs around trying to encourage them to better kind of measure what they were doing. I think one of the challenges we face kind of at the front line is, frankly, it's exhausting a lot of the time. That's why on a Friday afternoon you feel like you do when that additional person comes in, you know, with the needs they invariably have on Friday afternoon or Christmas Eve or the Thursday before Easter or, you know, whenever it happens to be. But it's a story we all know pretty well. It's tiring stuff. And so it's really difficult to kind of have the luxury to pull your head above that and really look at what you're doing in a way that's different. Because, you know, it's hard work pouring your life into this stuff all the time. And it's kind of vulnerable to ask, am I really doing the good job that I think I am? We kind of want to dwell on those stories of success because, frankly, that's what keeps us going, keeps us out of bed in the morning. But actually, I think we don't get any better unless we look kind of beyond that. So I think one of the things that you know, I've had the advantage now of looking right across the state of Victoria. You know, we've got 300 odd programs spread right across the state. And the difference between the ones that are really good and really bad, and let me tell you, we've got some shocking programs. But the really good ones are the ones that do this stuff, that actually look at themselves all the time and go, not only how can we do better, but how do we really know that that's the case? You know, like, where's the data? Where's the evidence base behind that demonstrates that we're not just telling ourselves we're doing a good job or this would become better, but actually someone else, you know, maybe an external evaluation, for instance, is doing that. And I think that, you know, that without a doubt is the difference between the best programs and the ones that are not so good. We actually put out one of the rare things in the policy unit we do that's internal. We actually very strongly kind of externally focused on government relations and public kind of stuff. But we did something that was internal, which was a kind of program development guide to give programs that were new to this idea a bit of an idea. It's just a kind of really simple kind of continuous quality improvement cycle. You know, have a look at what you're doing, do some measurement around it, reflect on that measurement, you know, change it, look at it again, those kind of things. Nothing amazing. But the big learning actually from us in that was that whilst we were telling kind of our programs to do it, we hadn't done it ourselves for the policy unit. We were spending all of this time, you know, yelling at government to fix stuff that they'd gotten wrong and, you know, being passionate about some stuff that really matters, but not actually having any kind of criteria within which to evaluate our own work. How do we know actually if we're doing, you know, kind of a good job in this policy and advocacy kind of work? So part of what came out of that was a more rigorous approach to looking at our own work and evaluating, are we successful in that? We did a lot of yelling and a lot of screaming around, you know, homelessness and housing and whatever. But unless something actually eventually shifts in that landscape, we may well ask ourselves, what was that all for? You know, could there be a better way of doing that? Plenty of lessons. And the last one, innovation and research. What are we trying that's new? How will we know that it works? So this is kind of related, but again, it's about, you know, never kind of pausing to kind of rest on your laurels for too long. Enjoy the successes, absolutely. But if you're dwelling on the successes from last year or the year before or whatever, it's too long. One of the really interesting things we've had happen recently is a program that came out of the Family Violence Service in Michelle's network in Crisis Services, which normally the situation there is that where there's a family violence incident, the police attend the scene, they record it. Believe it or not, they send a fax. Some of you won't know what a fax is, but it's an old school technology which combines a photocopier with a phone. Anyway, they fax this through to Family Violence Services, and Family Violence Services, you know, like after a busy weekend, have this stack of kind of faxes of police incidents, and they follow up from there. It's not a great system, in fact. So we were thinking about how can we improve upon that. And what we tried out was actually, instead of getting the police to fax stuff to a service in another place, we took a social worker, a family violence worker, and embedded them in the police unit so that they were there with the police day to day. They put a mental health worker in that unit as well. And so the work that the police were doing kind of around family violence was not just informed by their police training, but was directly informed by people with social work, family violence, mental health experience. The learnings from that have been incredible. It challenged both cultures. The police culture was challenged by the social work culture. The mental health stuff kind of informed everybody. It's been really transformative. But more importantly, it's demonstrated incredible success in working with people who are recidivist family violence offenders. So that's not just someone who had one family violence offence, but who, you know, again and again are turning up in these police reports. It cut that recidivism rate by 85%, and that's after a 2-year evaluation since the first incident. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but it's a great example of kind of let's try something new. Let's have a really rigorous approach to measuring it. So we got a university to come and do the research on it. We waited for 2 years before publishing these results. In fact, they haven't even been launched yet. But they're great results, and we want to interrogate them and make sure that we can consistently kind of apply them. All right. So there's a few things that we might want to think about in terms of questions. Feel free to interrupt at any time if you've got questions of us, by the way. We'll just keep rolling through. All right. What's working? Let's go on. Here we go. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Well, certainly the Task Force Alexa stuff is one of the kind of really top ones in terms of innovation and finding out some stuff that's new. There's some interesting stuff that's happening now and it is a space that you're in, trying to bridge that space in terms of the point at 18 where people finish their guardianship kind of orders. We know, and we've been advocating for some policy stuff around this, that around half the young people after 18 who, essentially get kicked out of home care and are on their own, they fall into homelessness within 2 years. It's a terrible, terrible system that's failing far too many young people. I think that's a Victorian statistic, but I doubt that it's very different anywhere. In fact, no one's got a great system for this. However, there's two good things that have happened in that space recently. One is that we've got some programs that are working on better kind of aftercare delivery that we've got some philanthropic funding for, and we're going to do some measurement around how can we be more effective kind of in that space. The other is that we did get the government to kind of cough up and make a commitment at the moment to subsidising housing for people until they're 21. The next layer above that is to ensure that there's the right supports in place so that they're not just in houses by themselves, because that housing will fall over. But the right combination of housing and support, in an ongoing kind of way, will kind of adjust that homelessness statistic. I'm absolutely confident of it. We need to be clear around what the practices are there, what changes from 18 through to 21 or to 25 or whatever it happens to be. It's not the same as the kind of guardianship stuff that happens before 18. And it has to have a strong, I think, education and training focus that leads towards employment as part of it. So we're testing out a few things in that kind of space as well. I think one of the other interesting things that they're doing, and again, this is kind of based out of St Kildea, is they've been doing some stuff around naloxone. So some of you will be familiar with naloxone or Narcan. But if somebody overdoses, takes heroin, for instance, has an overdose, if an ambulance attends, then they'll give them this drug that basically reverses the effects of that overdose, and the person, suddenly jumps up, often quite angry that you've taken away kind of their hit. But it's a very effective drug. It's only useful if you've got an ambulance there that can actually do that. So a lot of people who overdose and who end up with either permanent disability or who die do so because, the ambulance didn't get there in time, or, they were injecting with a friend who also was kind of under the same influence and so on. So we've been running this program around the peer use of naloxone, actually. There's a few different ways in different parts of the world about how that's administered, but effectively it means that if you've got someone who's injecting and they're injecting with a friend, or that family is around or whatever, then you don't have to rely on the ambulance attending to reverse the effects of an overdose. And that's a life-saving program, in fact.
That's a commitment of Access Health at St Kilda around education and health education and how to live healthier and safer. And so we would run sessions with people on how to use that drug and then supply them with the equipment to do it. Yeah.
Yep.
We do that regularly.
So there's a few examples of some of the things that are happening at the moment. All right. So I want to say something briefly kind of around a focus on outcomes. And I agree, and Ian mentioned this kind of earlier. I think there's a lot of really good things kind of about that. I'm also really aware kind of the dangers. There's quite a bit of evidence that the shift toward a focus on outcomes results in cherry-picking behaviours from agencies. So you pick kind of the clients that you're going to work with that are going to get you the outcomes you want because there are financial incentives for that. And that then further marginalises people who are already the most disadvantaged with complex needs because they're not going to get the wins on board, therefore they never get in the first place to the programs they need. So there's an interesting kind of tension there kind of in outcomes. I don't want to ignore them. We don't want to just be in the space where we're kind of, just charging throughput and marking those kind of off without worrying about whether it's had any effect in someone's life that's long-standing. But neither do we want to be so bound to the notion of outcomes that actually we end up serving an entirely different group of people, and those who most need our help can never get access to the service because they're never going to get on our stats. We're never going to get paid for the service that we do with them. We did some research on this a while ago when we moved towards the outcome star as a way of recording our work with people. Has anyone heard of the outcome star? A couple of people? Yeah. One of the good things about this is that it measures progress, so it doesn't take a kind of binary idea to outcomes, like is that person housed or not housed? Sometimes is a bit too overly simplistic. Actually, housing is probably a bad example, but sometimes we're kind of measuring success in really simple ways, and in fact, the pathway to success with a person is actually there's 10 steps between where they are now and where we want them to get. And if they've taken one of those 10 steps, that's a good thing. We don't only measure it when it gets to step number 10. And the outcome star tries to do this, and it does it in a holistic way. So it looks at, there's actually a range of stars, but they look at different dimensions in your life. So how you're doing in terms of your financial management, how you're doing in terms of interactions with the justice system, how's your housing going, how's your drug and alcohol use, etc. We've implemented this in quite a few services. And there's some interesting learnings in terms of being able to measure people's progress. But the research that we did, which still I think is a really good learning, said that the measurement of the progress of people is the least important thing that happened when we implemented the outcome star. The most important thing that happened is that it changed worker behaviour. The way that our workers interacted with people when they were engaging with the client and they had to measure, have conversations around how are you going, how are you looking in these domains, are we seeing your life in a holistic kind of perspective, that shifted. So we improved the relationships between workers and the people they were working with. We actually improved the quality of their work. And of course, that itself resulted in better outcomes. So the key was not necessarily about the rigorous measure of did we get these outcomes or not, because that would have resulted actually in excluding clients with complex behaviours. The key was, by measuring the outcomes, we actually got better practice. All right.
What works?
I'm on this again. Okay, partnerships.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, did you want to say something about outcomes?
No.
You're welcome to.
No, you keep going.
She sounds disappointed.
No, but I've got some stuff to say.
I'm just going to briefly say about partnerships because I think, I don't know how you guys feel like you're doing in this area. We've got some services that are brilliant at this, but not nearly enough of them. Yeah, you can try and take the credit for that.
Yeah.
We've got some services that are really bad at it too. And I think that's one of the dangers that we have, frankly, in the Salvation Army and with bigger sets of services, is that we do run the risk of feeling like we can be all things to all people, because we've got a range of services and we can link them all in together. And frankly, it's really convenient. If you can call someone within your own kind of network and it's someone you know and they can help you out with the problem, why would you call someone else outside the Salvation Army? It's a trap that we can kind of fall into. And it's not necessarily a bad thing inherently, as long as you're aware of it and recognise that there's work to be done kind of outside. There's a whole bunch of really good reasons to invest in partnerships. And when I say invest, I'm recognising that there's a genuine cost to this, actually. Investment in partnerships is hard work and it takes a lot of time, but it massively extends your resource base if you do it well, because partners can share resources and apply those to similar situations that you're seeing with people. It increases your credibility, I think, within the community sector. We barely actually apply for funding now that's not in partnership. We almost do nothing just as the Salvation Army, in one particular place. Almost everything is in partnership, and we're seeing far better success in our funding applications with that.
And it benefits the client. That's our bottom line.
It benefits the client and it gives you an external gaze that's valuable. Yeah. Actually, if you're prepared to allow someone in as a partner to see how your services are going, you can learn from stuff that they learnt that you never learnt yourself. So there's a whole range of really good reasons for that.
Yeah. The client stuff is really important.
All right, next one. Don't be deflated. It's not that she really wants to speak, it's that she's bored with me already. I do want to say a little bit about this because this is our key learning at the moment. We've spent quite a bit of time recently trying to do better with a range of what seemed to be at the time kind of discrete areas. So it's been very clear to us for a long time that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are disproportionately represented in our services. They're disproportionately represented in prison population, in the homelessness population. Their health outcomes are not as good. There's a whole range of areas. And frankly, we've not been doing a good job of that. So we've been embarking with Reconciliation Australia on the notion of a reconciliation action plan. How can we take some steps that ensure that our services are both aware and sensitive to Indigenous culture and the way that people, expect to be and should be kind of treated with that. It's kind of paying our dues, really. It's the beginning of that kind of process. So that's been a part of it. But we've also been doing in a kind of separate area of work, some work that recognises some of the particular disadvantages that people of different gender and sexualities kind of have in accessing our services. The Salvation Army's frankly got a pretty terrible record of this. You would not be blamed if you were a person who was gay or lesbian or bi or trans, approaching a service with a big red shield on the front if you hesitated and turned the other way. Our public kind of stance around this is such that you could not be blamed for thinking those people will not look after me. If I go there, I'll be discriminated against. I won't get the kind of service that other people will get. I'll be given a hard time for who I am. Okay. It's absolutely pretty live for us. Because we've been at the centre of stuffing it up at times. So we have to take some credit for that. Anyway, there's some repair work to be done. Our international mission statement says that we help people without discrimination, and we're trying to make that a reality. So part of that reality, again, is to kind of acknowledge the mistakes and ensure that we treat people in ways that are sensitive to who they are individually and as a group. So that's part of what the Rainbow Tick stuff that Michelle mentioned has been about. It's an accreditation system that ensures that the services that we provide right from kind of the first intake interview, which might ask questions that you don't even think twice about gender, for instance, or anything like that, are ones that, don't alienate people. Don't tell them that we actually don't understand who they are, even from the very beginning, and goes kind of right through the services. And it's made us think, about a whole range of things. If every poster that you have up on the wall of families is about heterosexual families, then someone who doesn't fit into that kind of mould might well question whether they're really a part, whether there's a sense of belonging for them kind of in your place. So yeah, that's been a part of it. But I guess
gender neutral toilets. It's a hot topic around the Salvation Army because I didn't have any brothers and I didn't grow up with people who don't aim very well and stuff. Some of our women do not want to share toilets with those kind of people, but some people don't feel safe, and I don't quite understand that either. But part of welcoming people is not making them decide between a gender that is not theirs to go and use the bathroom. So we have gender neutral toilets at crisis services, and it's not been without its bumps. We've got very limited funding to change our building, but we need to do that, and that's just an investment we need to make. And around that kind of stuff. Is that what you mean? Yeah, it's like, and I think in America, I think there's a really huge stink about gender neutral toilets. Like, not that that's a funny word, stink, around a talk about a toilet, but there is a big, huge hoo-ha about gender neutral toilet. But why do people feel unsafe?
Yeah.
Well, in the women's, there's cubicles. It's like civilised, isn't it? We're not asking them to pee in front of everyone like what happens in the other room. We just need to make cubicles and... Yeah, so people who don't have to choose,
Yeah.
Oh, what am I today? Where can I... Yeah, and then I've had people say to me about, well, if we have gender neutral toilets, of course the boys are going to look over. Of course they're going to. Well, that's why we keep them separate. I'm like, well, why don't we tell our boys not to do that? Why don't we teach our boys that is bad behaviour? I don't do that. I don't look over. Never thought of, but they were this person who worked at a boys' school, so of course they're going to do that. That's why we want to keep it separate. Well, let's start teaching our people to treat each other with respect.
Well, also I think usually, the greater the outrage about something, the less connected it is to genuine evidence. So everybody can have an anecdote about something that went wrong that happens 0.00001 of the time, but that doesn't mean our system should be based around that particular incident. Anyway, we've descended into toilet talk, which was...
It was only a matter of time.
It was bound to happen at some point. Anyway, I think, look, this is something that we've been learning about. As I was saying, there's a whole series of areas that have prompted here. It has been around... there's probably 4 key areas we're up to at the moment. So I've talked about kind of Indigenous area. I've talked about the LGBTIQ area. Disability is kind of another one, and called culturally and linguistically diverse communities, which include refugees and asylum seekers. But once we kind of began to add those up, firstly, we found that there's a lot of crossover between the things we were starting to talk about, and also that some people crossed over into them. Apart from the fact that I don't think you can be both Aboriginal and called at the same time, but you could be someone who has a disability as well as being gay, as well as, not having English as your first language, for instance. And so the intersection between multiple kinds of barriers like that creates real kind of marginalisation and disadvantage. And how do we begin to kind of think about the impact of that? I just want to say, because I've had a lot of questions from people in discussion around this about, it seems like we're kind of catering to more and more kind of minorities. Those questions are usually from people who themselves, like me, don't share any disadvantages in their lives. If you're not sure that someone's disadvantage or marginalisation is real, it's probably because you're a white male who's educated and middle class and a whole bunch of other things, where you haven't had to experience that kind of discrimination. The more and more I've talked with people who have faced the kind of discrimination that I haven't, the more I've recognised the reality of those situations is actually ever present for people.
Nice.
All right, I need to keep moving. Understanding, respect and culture, we've talked about that a little bit. Let's keep going. Okay, what works? This is back to you.
This is Clinton, who came to visit us on our Reconciliation Day. So when Jason... when he set up the sort of headings for this, and when he said what works, my instinct is community works, and you guys know that. You see lives transform through community, and I'm here really just for the fluffy stories around the edges. But then I started thinking about when, in my experience, has community really worked for someone. We had this guy Dave who walked into the Salvation Army at Brunswick, who was homeless and really nice guy, intellectual disability, 50 plus. But another member of our community brought him along. And so we found him a rooming house. Now, it wasn't rooming house standards, not too bad. It was in the local area, so could still access our services and come and visit us and have, lunch with us and things like that. And Dave is really introverted and shy and not confident. So on top of his intellectual disability, it was really holding him back in living a full life. So we set him up there, but we soon found out that the police had been called and things like that. It broke down because there was loud noise next door and he couldn't handle it, and he got scared and then he threatened somebody. So he was homeless again. So this member of the community that brought him along, who didn't have that much himself, was living in, public housing, said, well, he can come and live with me until you find him something. No pressure. So we put Dave on, we wrote an application for housing and thinking, this is going to take forever. So we actually put in everything about Dave. Here's this guy. Here's his weaknesses. Here's his strengths. Here's what he's scared of. What can you help us, kind of thing. And as Brian and Dave's placement was breaking down because neither of them were easy to live with, and it was kind of fairly chaotic. we got a call from housing saying, now we noticed that he's not quite old enough to go into this housing, but we've read your application and we want to put him in a block of units for older people. So here's his problems, but we think he'll fit in here. So and Dave's still living there. That's like, 10 something years later. The community supported Dave. He then started coming along to Sundays. He never interacted or done as much shopping as he did when he came every week to do the shopping with me for the community meal. He started talking to the ladies in the shops, and they would say, "Hey, Dave, how you going?" And so he built this whole community in Brunswick, and he was living close by. It sounds like a beautiful success story. He's had breaks in his mental health and things like that, and had to sort of be cared for again. But, Dave is, to me, like a story about when community works, when we go out on a limb and say, oh, yeah, he can stay with me for a while, or I'm not recommending that for everyone. But, the community response was great.
Alone in the boarding house, Dave drank more.
Yeah.
The more he drank, the more likely he was to get into fights. The more likely he was to get into fights, the more likely he was going to get evicted.
Yeah.
And so that shift not only kind of gave him a better environment to be in, but the other thing that came out of it was that he picked up some part-time work through us as well.
Yeah, I've forgotten
and
that
gave him a sense of purpose. He only worked 8 hours a week, 2 4-hour shifts, which is almost nothing.
And he loved it.
And you'd ask him, what are you doing tomorrow, Dave? Are you working? He'd be like, oh, no, I'm working the next day, but I'm going to spend tomorrow getting ready to work the following
I've got to
day.
Prepare myself,
like your 4-hour shift, which doesn't sound like much to you and I.
No, it
but
was
for
his
Dave,
world.
actually, it gave him a structure. If he worked kind of Monday and Thursday, then the days in between, he came to church on Sunday, or he'd do the shopping with Michelle on another day. There was enough in there that structured his week that didn't mean, it was all a blank slate that you would drink your way through.
Yeah. And, his backstory was horrible. But, what a wonderful idea. The community response at Brunswick was beautiful. I thought, there's no pictures of Dave.
Let's see another picture.
This is also the party that we had at Reconciliation Week. And we had community people painting, and all the women present put their handprints on this painting that is hanging in crisis services at the moment. It's beautiful. Beautiful thing. That's us at the Pride March. It's in Kildea. So that's mostly staff. We had a lot of clients as well. We had Willie the dog there, who's our office representative. And I don't think you're in that picture, Jace, but we were there. Wonderful, wonderful day. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. We've got to wrap it up. What doesn't work? Actually, I think you already know what doesn't work. I want to highlight a couple of things, and I guess we haven't talked a lot about kind of the faith perspective kind of in this. But when I began to think about what doesn't work in terms of a community service response, actually it was also my experience of what doesn't work in terms of engaging people in their spirituality. The notion, we've got the picture of jigsaw puzzles here, and I seem to kind of see lots of those in every kind of government plan. They're putting together disparate services in ways that no one ever thought about before. They always still seem to kind of rely on someone kind of holding those together, because putting that jigsaw puzzle of a mass of things together for people who are in the middle of crisis is pretty difficult. But some good notions about kind of key workers and ways to kind of hold that in. But absolutely kind of every time we kind of try and get something going, there's a great speaker who came out a few years ago who talked in the conference about the way that public policy works. And every time you fix something for kind of 95% of people in the population, which is almost impossible, by the way, you can rarely fix things for 80% of people in the population. But whatever it is, you try and fix something for the majority, you end up further marginalising the 5% or the 10% or whoever's left. Kind of the sting in the tail, she talked about it as. And that certainly has kind of helped think what my thinking around this kind of, okay, let's really kind of be wary of one-size-fits-all notions. Not that we should avoid thinking about trying fixes for the majority of people. Sometimes you've got to play the numbers, but you've always got to be aware of what's the impact that you then have on everybody else. And kind of coercive strategy. So let me raise something like work for the dole as a random example kind of here, as a strategy which again and again has been proven not to work. It doesn't gain people more employment. In fact, a whole bunch of reviews have said, it lessens people's chance of getting a job by engaging them in work for the dole kind of programs. But these also seem to me to be the inadequate and yet frequently seen kind of aspects of kind of sometimes our religious kind of work. We either have a one-size-fits-all kind of model of religion where we try and fit people into uniforms of some sort, uniform kind of structures both literally and figuratively around their particular faith pathway, or we have ways that are, as Khadija said yesterday, subtle or not so subtle ways of saying, oh, would you like to kind of come to church on Sunday, where it's not really kind of an open, gracious offer, it's kind of a hint about things would be better for you if you did that. It's not a threat, it doesn't have to be a threat, but if anyone kind of thinks that their circumstances are going to become better, they'll get a better service, they'll get treated in a different way because they're playing the Christian game, I think we've done something wrong. In fact, I think we've betrayed our own faith if we're making people work that way.
We did some training in Sydney, remember, for lieutenants, and we went along to one place that you couldn't have a meal there until you'd been to church beforehand. And it was like, horrifying.
It's like the bad practices we hear about in the bad old days, but they're still alive and well, I think. And so that needs some kind of interrogation as well. All right, we need to keep going. I did want to say just a brief thing kind of around housing first. There's 3 kind of terms that at the moment keep bubbling around in my mind because everybody thinks they're a good idea, and that always makes me suspicious. One of them is outcomes, one of them is integration, and the other one is housing first. And housing first should be the best of those 3. But the reason that I put them all together is that they're almost universally applauded. Oh, these are good things. We should look at outcomes more. We should do more integration. We should, do more housing first. What they escape is a common definition of what everybody really thinks about them. And housing first has been demonstrated to be one of the least consistently implemented models across the world, in fact. It's not that there don't exist some definitions of what that means. So it's not housing only, for instance. It should always include accompanying support. At its essence, it is about ensuring that people are not in a situation where they have to jump through 17 hoops before they get access to housing. And that's a good thing, and I'm totally supportive of that as well. But I am just a little bit aware that we speak about housing first as if it's a magic kind of fix. And it's absolutely not that. It's a good principle that we should embrace, but it needs a bit further discussion. And the same thing with kind of our notion about integration. I find you can get 12 people in a room and talk about integration. Everyone goes, yeah, integration's great. And no 2 people can agree on exactly what it means. The same thing. We've got some work to do in thinking about how we can better discuss these things in ways that are meaningful and that have some common ideas around them. That's all I want to say for that one. Let's keep going. Housing experiences. We were going to spend a bit of time talking a little bit about how crappy housing is at the moment, but I think actually we'll skip over that because I suspect that many of you are already very clearly aware of it, and those who aren't will just believe me if I say housing experiences are bad if you're on a person if you've got low income, your choices are so rare that you end up in bad places. So let's go on for that. This, I think, this excites me way more than it will excite anyone in this room, perhaps with the exception of Campbell Roberts. But this tells the story of what's going wrong with housing in Australia at the moment. And it's the gap between that orangey line, which is what's happening in housing prices, and the other lines kind of down the bottom. So the blue line are rents, which are kind of following the direction of housing prices, not quite as radically, but certainly in a steady direction upwards. The average weekly earnings is the red line, so that's been going up. But the bottom line, the green line, are the allowances. People on New Start or youth allowance, which is even lower kind of again. The gap between the increase, the very steady but slow increase in terms of the basic kind of income support that people are getting and the massive rise and trend in housing prices and rent is at the basis of so many of our problems. And if we're seeking solutions for that, it's pretty simple. You either got to do two things. You've got to drop the housing prices or you've got to raise the income at the bottom. We've got to ensure that people aren't spending 80% of their income, which is not unusual, on housing. We had some measures that were set up years and years ago that said, we think you could sustain a mortgage if, whatever you're paying on that mortgage was no more than 30% of your income. And a lot of those measures still persist kind of in our minds. But the reality has shifted for people in terms of what they're spending on housing. Our ESIS report this year showed that 2/3 of the people who are accessing our community support services were in extreme rental stress. They're paying more than 50% of their income on housing, and many of them are not just paying 50, they're paying 60, 70, 80%. Yep. Might be getting $250 a week on New Start, and they're paying $200 of that straight away just to keep a roof over their head. And the challenge there for us is that some of the policy levers we have really only kind of continue to nudge rents upwards. So if we just increase Commonwealth rental assistance, for instance, you just end up paying more for rent in that kind of space. Now, should we increase Commonwealth rental assistance? Yes, we probably should, but we shouldn't do that alone. We do need to kind of touch on some stuff around negative gearing, around capital gains taxes, a whole range of policy levers that could potentially have much greater impact than simply trying to kind of up the income at the bottom line. Anyway, I'm excited about that graph, but I know that we should move on. Because it explains the problem that people are suffering from every single day in a really clear way. Okay, we're going to talk about the way forward. Let's move on. So here are our challenges. Can we throw all of these up? Because they're pretty self-explanatory. So decline in housing affordability, yep. Insufficient, unsuitable and ageing public housing stock. Again, I think a lot of people will be familiar with that. The public housing stock we've had gets pretty minimal investment from year to year in state budgets. The proportion of our social housing too low is a critical one. So one of the things that adjusts that graph is that if you get into social housing, either public housing or community housing, you're paying only 25% of your income on rent. That's fantastic. You're in a better position than all of those people that we just talked about, 2/3 of people in our ESIS report that are paying more than double that, 50% plus of their income on rent. The catch is our public housing and social housing more generally stock is so low. Went overseas a couple of years ago with my daughter and we visited, stayed in Paris for a little while, and there was this incredible tent city under the bridge of asylum seekers. Just masses and masses of people who had come seeking a better life and not found it and had relocated and were surviving in these kind of tents under a bridge. We went from Paris to Amsterdam, not too far away in European terms, and there was nobody in tents. And we visited the Salvation Army and I said, look, we just came from this place and we keep hearing about this refugee crisis and people crossing borders and everywhere and, not too far kind of away, it seems really bad. But here, it's not so bad. What's the problem? Aren't there refugees here? Aren't there asylum seekers? And they said to us, yes, there are. We house them. That's the solution. 50% of the housing in Amsterdam is social housing. That makes such an amazing difference in terms of people with low incomes or people struggling to kind of enter the housing market and stay in it, that it's hard to believe. Now, our average in terms of social housing in Australia, you can guess already, it's lower than 50%. It's lower than 5%. It's actually now down around 4.2, 4.3%. Victoria is the worst state of the lot. We're at about 3.5% social housing. So if you think about that as kind of a direction, and that's going downhill steadily, in order to bring that up to the 4.5%, 5% mark, which, is pretty subtle in the UK, they're talking about 18, 19% right around there. So we're already very low. But let's say we got ambitious and wanted to move 3.5 all the way up to 5, we'd have to build 3,000 houses a year for the next 30 years. The biggest we did in the boom of social housing back in the 80s, 70s and 80s was about 1,000. So the task is massive, and it's a task right across Australia. I don't know what the exact percentage is in South Australia, but it's probably not more than 4 or 5 at the most. Even if you were the best in the country, you'd be around 5, 6%. So it's massive. We're going to put a lot of pressure on this year around our government because we've been saying these things about housing, and they said, yeah, we'll give you a housing strategy. And look, to their credit, they put $2 billion into housing. I don't want to diss that. That was a good thing to do. What they didn't do was give it a plan and say, with this money, we want to build this many houses over this many years to get to this goal. And without that plan, we can't hold them accountable for not doing it. So what we're going to push with them really strongly this year is we want a really clear plan. This is where we think you should situate the plan. And it's around 3,000 kind of new units a year. Now, you don't have to do all of that with builds. Admittedly, you can do some with rental subsidies and stuff like that. But actually, if you do it with builds, it shifts the rest of the housing market down because you've got a supply and demand little economic thing happening. If you do it with rental subsidies, you probably push it in the wrong way. So most of it has to be builds, actually. There's no way of kind of escaping that at the centre of homelessness problems that we're all facing, seeing one end of, is you actually need more houses, and you need more houses that are affordable for people on low incomes. It's not rocket science, it's very plain. But actually, we've been going in the wrong direction for more than 20 years now, probably 30 at least. Yeah. All right. Is there any good news? Yeah. Here's the. We'll talk about some good news. The good news is that sometimes it can work. We heard the story of Dave kind of before. When it works, I think it has these kind of characteristics that there are times in which we can pull together a holistic perspective. And I think faith-based organisations like the Salvation Army do that better than anyone else, frankly. I think it's part of the way that, we exist. Maybe it's part of acknowledging that there's a spiritual dimension to life or whatever. But we tend to kind of recognise that we're not just doing about the single thing and walking away. It's more than just fixing the cat and then leaving that person to fix the rest of their things. We have a sense that it's not even just about the individual, but it's that individual's existence in communities. So when things are holistic, person-centred, community-based, they absolutely have a better chance of success. Let's have a look at the next one. We're nearly at the end. This is what we're going to be talking about kind of in the next one. And this to me seems so simple that it's obvious, but we're missing it so badly, we're going to state it anyway. The rhetoric that we're working around for the next conversation with the government around budget, and we'll do this around the election next year, is that these are the ingredients for a good society. How do we build a better Victoria? And you could easily apply it in South Australia or WA or wherever you wanted to, actually, because it's the same. It's the same in New Zealand. The bottom part of it is a home, you can't do much without that. Yes, I've met some exceptional homeless people who manage to do amazing things and live in the park at the same time. But for the vast majority of us, we're better off if we've got a place that's stable and we can call home, we can go to, and we know is going to be there tomorrow. That is kind of foundational. The next level above that is that to ensure that we can stay in that home and remain in education, employment, training, connected to our communities, all of those kind of things, we've got to have access to support, whether that's mental health support, whether it's support with a family violence situation, whether it's support because you've got a drug and alcohol problem or gambling, whatever it is. That simple notion of support when you need it is one that's falling down all over the place at the moment. People are not having access to the support that they need, and because of that, they're falling into homelessness. The whole kind of thing falls apart. And then the top layer, and if you're thinking, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's okay. But, this notion of connection to community, that we don't do it by ourselves, perhaps you could quote an example of some very successful hermits who lived satisfying lives alone. But for the most part of it, we benefit from connection to community and one another. And in fact, that connection to community, including communities of faith like this one, are the things that hold you through the tough times, are the things that when actually, you had a difficult time paying your rent or reconciling with your partner, or, you just needed to really just vent with someone about your child and what they were doing that drove you bananas, that made something better for that moment in time, and that allowed you to get to the next day. It's not brilliant, but all sorts of things come out of that really kind of simple framework. So we can take that and we can talk about specific economic and budgetary kind of injections that we'd be looking for that will be tied back to that model that paints a picture of this is what we're all after. I think that's almost it. There might be one more. Yeah, this is the final slide. This is some thinking, and I'm interested if you can pick holes in this, come and see me later on. But we kind of planned this in a discussion when I was headed up actually to do the walk with Brendan and have a discussion about when you get to Canberra, what are you going to ask for? And that's still forming. We're still working out the finer details of that. But if we were to try and capture something, not in a 20-page document with 17 different kind of things, what's the end goal? I think these are kind of the components of it. Everybody needs access to housing that's timely, affordable, sustainable, suitable. Yep. So timely, you shouldn't go on a waiting list like the 30,000 people who are currently in my state who are waiting for public housing. That's a basic kind of problem, and be on that waiting list for years. There's even a transfer list because our public housing is so terrible, people want to move from one place to another with about 7,000 people in it. That's problematic. So we don't fix the timely thing without creating new builds. The Commonwealth are the only ones with the funds to do that. The states actually can't do it by themselves. So the states need to make it happen, but the Commonwealth need to put the funds in. So timely is critical. We've got to have good pathways to that, and we've got to have the stocks to make it work. It's got to be affordable. So the notion of it sitting kind of in the housing, the social housing spectrum, or even better kind of gaps, so that you don't have this big gap between 25% and 50%, 60, 50 and so on. It's no wonder that people say, well, the only solution for me is public housing, because they know that the alternative is to lose 80% of their income on rent. So people wait and wait and wait for public housing. We need better intermediary measures that bridge that gap. Yep. So it needs to be affordable. Needs to be suitable. Now, that's not my favourite word in this, but you kind of know what it means. You can't have old people going up 7 flights of stairs every day. You can't have a family in a 1-bedroom unit with 5 kids. We've got all sorts of problems with the existing kind of stock that we've got that mean it is unsuitable. And frankly, I put most of the rooming houses I've been to in that category. They're simply unsuitable for almost everybody. Without some really significant changes. So, it's got to be decent kind of level of housing. And it's got to be sustainable. Now, sustainable is partly about tenure. It's partly about ensuring that, you might have a 5-year lease on this particular place. That means, you don't have to predict magically about whether you're going to be out the next month. But it's also about ensuring that you've got those supports built around you to do that. So if you fall behind on your rent, there's some kind of system that kicks in to go, oh, hang on, this person needs help. Not they need to be evicted. We need to find a pathway to keep them in that housing, because evicting them is going to put them into a more costly homelessness system than what it's going to take to keep them in the housing they've got at the moment. If you've got a problem with your neighbours because you've got a mental health issue, then you need some help there to make your housing sustainable. Or if you've got a drug and alcohol problem, etc. So the sustainability is really about support when you need it. It's that line. So, yeah, I think that captures most of what I'm hoping to do. But if you've got any ideas about that, I'm interested in it. And that is our time. You've been incredibly patient. Even Michelle has given up on me and joined the ranks.